Professor A.K. Enamul Haque, who's a professor from the East West University and director of ACD Bangladesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you. I think it was has been an excellent discussion so far. All the discussants presented their thoughts process quite eloquently. And some of the issues are, I think, in the heart of everyone that we are listening to it. The issue that I want to bring in, and I think when we say Asia as the hub of the education for the next of this century, I think there are two different ways of thinking. One is already a hub because we are the number. No, if you look at the number of students in the universities or education system, I think we are already a hub. But I don't believe that is the hub we're looking at. And so, if you want to make as a leader of education, and I think that is where I would focus maybe about 5-6 minutes of my time to understand that education has moved from different focal point. Education originally started more of a religious education. Education more of a started creating human society from a very tribal point of view, from a religious and tribal point of view. That is how education started. Education mostly started with science, medicine, religious and law. These are the basic education that started. It was, I think, the biggest change of education that has happened, and I think that's how the education, modern education, that what we see, probably in the 13th and 17th century. That is the time when education, we were looking at education, and what you call the education was targeting a national goal. So 13th to 17th century, the education that people were looking in the Europe was looking at national goal, and the higher primary, secondary education that we see today began in there. Before that, education was mostly based on individual skills. Religious institutions was dominating the education. So if you look into that, and that's the discipline-based education that what we see today, it was the product of that particular century. The biggest change of education after that came probably after the 17th century, when our target has completely changed. We started looking education from a rote learning to a more of a learning for love, if you think about it. So education started looking at the psychology of the learners rather than creating a machine. And that's what memorization, rote learning was part of the education at that particular time. So giving that background, I think if you look at us means South Asia and Asian, particularly after colonization, after independence, our education was mostly motivated for nation building. Every nation wanted to build their own education system in order to create a nation. And I think for the last century, we have done it. But while we're doing it, we were strongly regulated. We were strongly regulated by institutions within our own nation, and those regulation has put a break. What is innovation has completely stopped within the education system. We are now looking at fulfilling the requirements of the curriculum rather than looking at what everyone has been talking about. What is the objective we are looking at? So while we're blaming, for example, Dato was also mentioning about it, and I agree with it, that we are blaming the politician, I think we should blame also educationists, because the regulators are all educationists, and they have created with a national goal. The reason I'm putting this forward, because with this, and particularly in the Asia, if you look into it, we're looking education more of a clerical sense. We're looking education with the credit hours. We are looking education as degree after degree with a hierarchy. We're not even allowing people to skip any lesson. If even today in Oxford, you'll find out 12-year-old boy get into the university. It is impossible in any countries in Asia. And that is because we never understood or never had a change in the motivation for education. So I think if you want to make Asia as a center for excellence, we have to think differently. We cannot lead the world by copying somebody. We cannot lead the world because somebody has failed. We cannot lead the world because we are just going to create their system and then we lead them. My understanding is that we have to find our own niche and say, where is Asia? So if you think carefully in terms of Asian qualities, I think my understanding is that if you look into the innovation research that you look in the last 20 years, 50% of the modern innovations were done by the Asians throughout the world. If you look at the American innovation patent 50% were Chinese. Of the rest of the 50%, other 50% are South Asian, either India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. So you can see the domination already there. However, when you want to say like we want to make Asia change, my feeling, and this is what my feeling, and I don't know whether we all agree with it, is that we have to move out of that nationalistic view of education. It has to be globalistic, it has to be intercontinental, and it has to be a collaborative education. So when we want to say education is hub for Asia, we should understand that institutions across Asia should recognize each other, rather than waiting to be recognized by the Western Educational Index and say, oh, they are telling us we are the best. That will not make us the hub or make us the best. What we need, we should cross-recognize each other. We should allow students to travel across the border, teach, learn from another institution, another professor, and this cross-recognition is an important one. That is one strategy that I want. Second one important, that we want the education system much more open than what is regulated. We are regulating education to the extent that we are forcing people, university system in Bangladesh, for example, forcing people to study class 11, class 10 history at the university level. Answer is we should understand that university education, higher education should remain very open and open, cross-cultural, multicultural, multiracial, multilingual. All these are part of a modern education. And Asia is hub of multiple cultures, multiple nations. It's not an European multicultural. European multicultural is completely different than Asian multicultural. India is a good example. Even China, even though we see Chinese as one nation, but it is multicultural. Each region, each province is different. Linguistic difference exists, cultural difference exists. Same with India is a perfect example. So when you live in a multicultural scenario, not like a multicultural city, this is multicultural nations. Given this, I think education in Asia should look into this, and that should be the strategy. So what I'm basically mean that you need a completely different strategy to make Asia a hub. And I would urge academics and education to think carefully between the line and say, look, the nationalistic view of education will not make Asia the hub. Look at the global education. They are all international. They do not look at the national education. Our UGCs, our higher education commission, they're all nationalistic. And because they're nationalistic, I would say it will be very difficult for Asia to become the hub. So we have to get out of this, make global, and that should be the objective of the modern education. Thank you very much.